My name is Thomas Rydbeck, and I am a hated stranger in this small Scandinavian town where I work. Everyone in town knows what I did, and now a lot of people outright hate me. The simple reason for their hatred was that I had seduced a very beautiful woman who was married to a popular local athlete. After their divorce, her husband began to have serious problems, and his friends and supporters blame me for ruining his career. Even though many of her ex-husband's acquaintances should know the truth about him, they still blame me for his problems. But so far only 5 of them have taken physical action against her and me. They broke an expensive window, which caused bruises on my face. No matter what I say or do, no matter how well I explain what really happened, I will always be considered a lustful scumbag who could not resist temptation and deceived a beautiful married woman into cheating on her loving, innocent husband and ruined their happy marriage. I was born and raised in a nice village just 12 kilometers from the town, where I still work in the same job as before this love affair. Between the small town and my village flows a narrow stream, which today forms the border between the two counties. But several hundred years ago, this stream was the border between two warring countries, waging many brutal wars. Today my side is considered the good guys who won the last of the wars and took over the lands across the creek. This is why people from other parts of our country can still be unloved there as damn strangers for simple reasons, usually for stealing a beautiful local girl or taking a good job from the locals. After military service and a technical education from one of the best schools in the country, I landed a job with a multinational company and spent almost 10 years abroad in countries such as Brazil, the Philippines, and Angola. In Brazil, I had a good time as a gay bachelor and entered into 2 rather short affairs. But before I went to the Philippines and Angola, I met and married Evelina, a beautiful girl. When my work in Angola came to an end, so did my marriage to Evelina. Returning home, I soon met a pretty girl named Lena, fell in love again, and managed to get a job as a general manager just 136 kilometers from her hometown in the north, where her parents and sister still lived. The Northerners considered such a distance just a stone's throw away. My family problems began when Lena could not find a suitable job. After a while, she wanted me to buy her a flower shop, which was a big mistake because I hardly saw her from that moment on. She became interested in the environmental movement and spent long evenings in the dam store, which, after closing, became something of a club for her strange friends, usually 6 days a week. She even went to see her parents every Sunday. After 2 years in the North, I turned the company's negative performance into good profits, for which I was called a miracle worker. I started receiving job offers from other parts of the country. Lena and I had a huge fight when I suggested we become a real family with kids and move south because I was really fed up with the long, cold northern winters. Lena refused, and after a few days we agreed that living together with such different expectations was not a fair deal, so we parted without hard feelings. I quit my job within a few months of our separation and headed south again. I didn't hesitate at all when I was offered my current job as managing director of a local industry just 12 kilometers from my home village. When my parents retired and bought a house in Torremolinos on the sunny Mediterranean coast of Spain, they sold their house to my sister and her husband. Almost at the same time that I got a new job, my sister's husband received such a lucrative job offer that he couldn't resist. The job was almost 300 kilometers away, so they sold the house to me. Now I'm back to basics. At work, I quickly discovered that small changes resulted in good reporting numbers, and therefore there was no immediate need for a major reorganization, which would have turned too many people against me. I left behind an old secretary, Mrs. Jansen, who knew everything worth knowing about everyone in the office and was a great help to me. I let her do her job the way she was used to, and although she was much older than me, we soon became very good friends and a successful management team for the company. When I took this position, Mrs. Jansen told me that she would retire in about a year when her husband retired. They had plans to move to the south of Spain, which is to EU citizens what Florida is to retirees in the US. 3 months before I retired, Mrs. Jansen asked me if I had any plans for a new secretary, and since I had none, She suggested an option. She knew a bright young woman, a relative of hers, who disliked her current job and, in Mrs. Jansen's opinion, would be ideal for the position after her. I thought it wouldn't hurt to take a look at her, so we made an appointment. On the day of our meeting, Mrs. Charlotte Haroldson was in my office on time. I was surprised at what a stunning woman she was. Very beautiful, dressed very elegantly, but not provocatively, with a very easy manner. It was a very pleasant surprise. Mrs. Jansen brought us coffee and cakes, looked at us with a smile on her face, and said, "Good luck to you both." I invited Charlotte to sit down and have some coffee while I carefully studied the documents she had brought. The silence lasted almost 5 minutes until I asked her to tell me about herself, why she left her previous jobs, and why she wanted to work for me in this company. She did it well, without unnecessary details. My next question was what salary she was expecting. She knew her worth, and I didn't see anything wrong with that. After a few more questions and casual conversation, I promised to call her the next day about work. Charlotte impressed me for several reasons. Without a doubt, she was the ideal secretary for me, but she had other qualities. Although I have never claimed to be a saint, far from it, I have never used my position at work to seduce female employees. But there's always a first time, and as soon as Charlotte left my office, I knew taking her panties off would be my secret fantasy. After a short conversation with one of her former bosses, I called Charlotte and offered her a 6-month probationary position at a slightly lower salary than she expected and promised to renegotiate the salary after the probationary period. She agreed, and it was the beginning of a new era in my office. Mrs. Jansen soon learned that my hiring of Charlotte had caused gossip behind my back because it was not my responsibility to hire employees, and the union accused me of giving benefits to Charlotte because her husband was a sports star instead of promoting the most qualified of the other secretaries to this position. I didn't ask what she did, but Mrs. Jansen soon managed to eliminate all complaints about Charlotte. Charlotte and I started working together surprisingly well from the start. Although I could not deny that I was falling in love with her, I avoided any attempt to show any personal interest in her. There was no point in rushing such matters. It was better to act 100% correctly until the time came. The right moment for seduction, if it ever comes. However, sometimes she showed special attention to me and gave me such a gentle smile that I really didn't know what to do. Somehow I had to find out if she was just teasing me for fun or if she had serious feelings for me. One thing that bothered me was that Charlotte started coming to the office in a sad mood, more often than when she first started working. The problem worsened when we booked a 2-day business trip to the nation's capital to negotiate with a government agency and meet with important clients. Everything was fine until the morning of the day before departure. Charlotte came into the office crying and said that her husband was not allowing her to go on this trip. What could I do? I tried to find out the reason for his distrust, but she could not give me an answer and swore that she had never been unfaithful and did not plan to cheat during the trip. I called Mariette Hallerston, who worked as a secretary in the accounting department. Even though she was married, she agreed to go with me on that trip. I knew she was a smart woman, but the problem with her was that, as Mrs. Jansen had told me earlier, Marietta had been promised the job as the managing director's secretary, which I gave to Charlotte, and so she probably didn't like me very much. Marietta was an elegant lady, and I could not blame her for being a little cold, but very polite towards me during our express train to the capital. However, even though she probably didn't love me more than a boil on her ass at this point, she continued to be a little cold, but very right towards me, and did an amazingly good and professional job throughout the first day of our trip. Together, we were a good team in negotiations with government officials and achieved much better results than I dared expect. Being a normal man all around, I even came up with some lewd thoughts in my head about what it would be like to take off her panties. But I knew that this was completely out of the question, and I had to put such fantasies out of my head. But I couldn't get Marietta out of my head, and suddenly another idea struck me. I have always dared to do the unexpected to win advantages, and that is why I was successful in the North, which impressed the board members of my current company when they started looking for a new managing director. I was neither able nor willing to say no to the offer they made to me. Returning to our hotel after business meetings, I asked Marietta if we could have dinner together in the evening, and she replied, "Is this an order or a private invitation? I can't give you orders before we start work tomorrow morning, but it will be an opportunity for us to talk about some important things here tonight rather than later in my office." She looked at me with concern and asked, "Are you unhappy with me or my work today?" "No, not at all. You did a good job today, and you don't need to worry about anything from me. I don't harass female employees." For the first time that day, she smiled at me and replied, "I never thought you were at such a low level, and I must say I was impressed by the way you looked for solutions today instead of dwelling on problems. Of course, we can have dinner together." Dinner was spent in pleasant conversations on non-work topics. We shared a rather expensive bottle of wine, which worried Marietta until I told her it was at the company's expense, because this day was the first step into a new era for our old company. Marietta looked confused because she didn't understand anything I said. I left her perplexed until we received coffee and cognac. Then I said, "Dear Marietta, I've kept you curious long enough, and it's time to tell you the big news. I had an idea today, and after a serious conversation with the chairman of the board of directors, he agreed with me and gave me the green light to implement it. As you know, one of our department heads is about to retire, and it's time to look for his successor. Today, I found the right person." Marietta looked even more embarrassed as I continued, "Dear Marietta, our old company is now taking a step into a new era, and it is my great pleasure as managing director to offer you, Marietta Hallerston, the position of the first female department head." She was shocked and looked at me for a moment before saying, "You can't be serious. Why me?" I smiled at her and said, "Because you showed professionalism today, even though I barely fit into your top 100 list of preferred employees." She smiled back and said, "I've never had dinner with anyone who wasn't on that list. I was impressed with your work today, which got you on my list. But please tell me, are you serious?" "Yes, I'm serious." "But why? I'm a secretary, not an engineer." "You don't have to be an engineer. You will be a spider in the web who will support the entire process towards one goal. Eric will be your mentor for a while, and I'll be there if you need me. Let's go to the piano bar and celebrate." I told her that her promotion would be a secret for now, but if she trusted her husband, she could tell him. On the way to the bar, her husband called her about one of their children, and when she told him the news, he insisted that we drink a bottle of champagne at his expense. I tried to say that it would be at the expense of the company, but Marietta did not agree and ran to the bartender, who smiled and hugged her. Of course, I'd heard plenty of rumors about coworkers being easy targets during promotion celebrations, and I couldn't deny that Marietta would make some great trophy sex. But I liked her so much that I didn't want to be batty was a guy towards her, so I pushed aside all lewd thoughts about her for that evening. We had a nice time in the bar. Marietta was a good singer and received long applause after performing the song with the pianist. However, since we had important work to do the next day, we ended the evening quite early. Of course, we spent the night in separate rooms. At breakfast, she thanked me for the promotion and for a pleasant evening. We again had good negotiations for our company during the day. On the express train back home, she asked me if she could ask me a very personal question. I agreed, and she asked, "Are you and Charlotte having an affair?" I answered truthfully, "No." "Why are you asking?" "Because there are rumors about it in the company. Charlotte is a very sweet woman, and I wouldn't hesitate to pursue her if we met at an after-hours party. But as you probably noticed yesterday, I don't hit on married co-workers. Never did this. I am very grateful to you for this, because I am a faithful wife of a loving husband who trusts me 100%. But with Charlotte, the situation is completely different, because she is married to a real scoundrel. I'll bet a month's salary that Charlotte loves you, but doesn't dare make the first move. Several girls in the office asked me to have a serious conversation with you about her. She never told me anything bad about her husband. The only thing I know about him is that he is the star of the local football team. Marietta looked at me for a moment before answering. I know he beat her several times for no real reason. He's so jealous that he'll never let her go on a business trip like this with you. I can't deny that I suspected something was wrong, and I even asked her if she had any problems. She said no, so I didn't know it was as bad as you told me. How well do you know Charlotte and her husband? One of my husband's best friends is Kent Haroldson's cousin, and has told us many times what a creep he really is. He cheated on her, but he hardly lets her dance with anyone else at parties. It was obvious that things were worse than I thought, so I asked, why doesn't she leave such a monster? She is hesitant to do this without help, so you will be the perfect knight in shining armor to save the poor beauty from the dragon. Of course, you won't get half the kingdom, but I'm sure you'll get a beautiful wife. I and most of our colleagues will support you as much as we can. What about you? Didn't you blame her for taking the position you wanted? She didn't borrow anything, and after I found out about her problems, I felt sorry for her. You gave her this position, and I can't deny that I didn't like you very much for a while, but you were a good leader for the company. Most people love you, and after getting to know you better, I must admit that I have even changed my opinion about you. With a bright smile, she said, I swear I did most of this before you offered me a new job. We shared a taxi from the train station in a town that was some distance from ours. When we stopped at her house, her husband was in the garden. I thanked him for the champagne, and my first impression of him was that he was a simple and sociable guy. After a short conversation, we agreed to meet at the pub the next day after work to chat. The next morning, Charlotte was again in a sad mood, and I did not ask her any more questions about the failed business trip. Instead, I briefly updated her on the progress of the negotiations and said that everything was under control. Marietta's husband, Emil, and I met after work. He was curious to know why his wife was promoted to a management position, and I told him the truth. I noticed her abilities during our first negotiations when we had some small problems, and she acted as an experienced assistant, which allowed us to get out of these problems and turn them to our advantage. In my report to the chairman of the board of directors, he and I agreed that promoting a capable woman would be a timely decision and would fit perfectly into our men's organization. The job won't be easy, but she can do it. We then had a long discussion about Charlotte, who lived in much worse conditions than I had imagined. Emil asked me about my plans for her and said that he and Mariette hoped that I would think of something. I told him it's hard to do anything if she refuses to accept help. However, I had never encountered a situation like this before and promised to do my best to help Charlotte and keep him updated. The next day, Charlotte told me that her husband was out of town with the football team until Sunday evening, so I invited her to dinner. We went to my favorite tavern, L&A, in my home village. While we were waiting for our order, I told Charlotte the story of the owners of this tavern. Local girl Linda went to the Greek island of Crete with two friends for a 2-week holiday. There she met a handsome young Greek man named Agilo, fell in love with him, and they had a very romantic holiday affair. After returning home, they continued to exchange messages and talk on the phone for several weeks until their romance began to fade and become a memory. When Linda found out she was pregnant, she called Agilo, and he took the first possible flight to Scandinavia to see her. Some time later, they got married and opened a tavern in our small village, a real mission impossible by all accounts. However, everyone in our village wanted the young couple to succeed and began to support them as best they could. Today, they are doing well and customers are coming from a large region. Charlotte looked at me and said, "True love can work wonders." Linda then brought our order. After the usual exchange of pleasantries, she said, "You two look so happy that I'm starting to think about saying congratulations. If I'm right, then one evening you will have a romantic dinner at the house's expense, at your convenience." Charlotte blushed, but then laughed and said, "It would be a shame to miss out on a great dinner. What do you say?" I started laughing too and said, "That's right. but we should go on a date first to get this generous offer. Linda said, "You can't fool me," and she left. The food was wonderful, and afterwards I invited Charlotte to take a look at my house. She agreed. After looking around the ground floor with the living room, dining room, and kitchen, Charlotte said, "It's a shame that one person lives in such a beautiful house. Many women would be happy to live here with a good man like you." I replied, "I agree, but I don't need many women. I would be happy if you could tell me where to find one beautiful woman who would like to live here with me. It depends on your expectations. What is your perfect woman? An innocent maiden? No, this time I want something much better. Something like you would be ideal." We were now standing quite close to each other and looking into each other's eyes when she replied, "In that case, I can give you advice on where to find her." "Please tell me where." She looked almost scared now as she whispered, "Right here." I hugged and kissed her and asked, "Are you sure?" "Yes, I'm sure, because I love you." I hugged her tightly and said, "I love you too, Charlotte." After a few kisses, I let her go and said, "Let's see the second floor now." We went upstairs and started in the master bedroom, where we both knew there was no turning back. We thought of only one thing and began to undress each other as quickly as possible. I glanced at her naked body and said, "You are beautiful." She said nothing and pulled me onto the bed, where I was on top. It was one of the most sincere acts of love in my life, and all I could say was, "I love you, Charlotte." She hugged me tightly and whispered, "I love you too." Of course, we forgot all thoughts about returning to work. Instead, we made love again. The only difference was that this time it lasted a little longer. Resting after the second intimacy, she hugged me and asked, "Do you really understand what you got yourself into?" "Yes, I understand." Then I called the office and told her that Charlotte and I were taking the day off because she promised to help me buy clothes. The girl at the reception was very professional and replied, "Have a nice weekend." Charlotte and I got dressed, and she went to the bank to transfer some of their accounts before we went to her apartment to pick up clothes and other personal items. In the apartment, I immediately noticed what a selfish bastard her husband was. There were enlarged photographs of himself everywhere, but hardly any photographs of Charlotte. Then she showed me a huge antique Baker cabinet and said that it was her personal heirloom, inherited, and she had to take it with her, otherwise Kent would probably destroy it because he would hate both her and the cabinet. I called a friend from the village who had a Toyota Hiace, and he promised to help the next day. Charlotte took everything she needed for the first time and decided to return the next day for the rest. On the way back to my house, we stopped at the supermarket to fill the refrigerator and kitchen cupboard with essentials. Together, we prepared a very nice romantic dinner by candlelight with the best wine from my collection stored in the basement. After dinner, she asked me many questions about my previous wives and why those marriages broke up. I told her the truth so that she would always have the same answers to questions about my past. She asked me to swear that I had never hit either of my wives. I swore and gave her Lena's phone numbers so she could call her and ask. Charlotte didn't. Instead, she asked me about Marietta. "Did anything happen between you two during the business trip?" I told her the simple truth again. The chairman of the board of directors and I decided to promote Marietta, and she and I celebrated a little in the evening at the hotel piano bar. Only as friends and nothing more. Why didn't I get this promotion? Is Marietta better than me? Because you and Marietta are two different personalities with different qualities, and Marietta was the best choice for this position. For example, she will have to travel a lot, and an understanding and supportive family will be a great advantage for her. But no one can consider Kent to be an understanding or supportive husband. Charlotte looked a little disappointed as she asked, "Do you know Marietta's husband?" "Yes, I know. He is a simple and sociable person. I'm sure you'll like him as a friend." Now Charlotte seemed very surprised, so I continued, "Please look on the bright side of this. If you were offered this position and you accepted it, we wouldn't be able to do what we did today, and we wouldn't be able to do what I really hope you and I will do in the future. The only thing she could say was, "What do you hope we will do?" Much. Live together in this house, and if everything goes well, the time will come when we will have children. Do you want this? Are you really serious? I'm still married to Kent for at least another 6 months, and people will think I'm a cheating woman. Do you really want to start a family with me? You never cheated on me, and everything will be fine. I then continued, "Do you want to be the mother of my children?" Charlotte laughed loudly when she heard my question, because more than 100 years ago, one of our country's great authors proposed to a young girl with that exact phrase. Then she replied, "Werner von Heidenstam asked a young maiden this famous question, and you are asking a married woman. Okay, what will a married woman say? She'll say yes." It was an exciting first date for Charlotte and I. She decided to leave her domineering husband and get involved with a man she only knew through work. I convinced the girl of my dreams to start a family with me. We agreed that it was a truly great day for both of us. After a few more conversations about the future, she wrote a letter to Kent, and after a night of cocktails, we went to bed for more gentle sex. Charlotte didn't have birth control pills with her, so we decided that they would now be a thing of the past. My friend Daniel arrived in his Hiace shortly after breakfast, and we drove to Charlotte's apartment. Her antique closet was quite heavy, so one of her neighbors helped Daniel and me carry it out to the car. Charlotte told him the truth, that she was leaving Kent forever, and the neighbor replied that he did not blame her. She didn't take anything they bought together, only personal items and what she inherited from relatives. She left the letter on the kitchen table, and the last thing she did was throw her keys through the mail hole in the apartment door. I really admired her courage to take such a huge step in her life and hoped that she would never have a reason to regret what she did. Daniel refused to accept payment for his help, so I invited his wife Anne Christine and 2 children to lunch at the tavern. Linda laughed when she saw that Charlotte and I were still together. She said, "I was right about you, my love, and your dinner will be at 8 o'clock next Friday." And Christine came up with an idea for Charlotte and me and invited us to a welcome to the village party that was to be held at their house that evening. The party was a great event considering it was organized very quickly, everyone brought something different, and she managed to get 5 more couples to join us. Even Linda and Aguilo joined us after the tavern closed, and Aguilo caused a lot of laughter when he tried to teach a slightly tipsy Charlotte how to dance a difficult Greek dance. We spent most of the next day relaxing after the party. Charlotte was a little surprised that no one seemed jealous when everyone was dancing and joking with other people's spouses. I then called Emil and told him the news about Charlotte and I, and after congratulations from him and Marietta, I asked her if she had any suggestions for my next secretary, because company rules did not allow Charlotte and I to continue working together. Marietta suggested a young but intelligent girl named Matilda Anderson. On Monday morning, I spoke with a wrestler who worked in the accounting department. He agreed to spend the day at the reception in case Kent Haroldson came to cause trouble. Charlotte and I then went to HR, where we learned that a qualified 18-month replacement job in accounting would become available soon, which would be acceptable to Charlotte. She agreed. Then we agreed on the candidacy of Matilda Anderson and found out that she was in line for a promotion. 10 minutes after 10 in the morning, I received a message from the reception that there had been shouting, but the wrestler had managed to persuade Haroldson to leave the building. He returned after lunch, this time smelling of alcohol, and refused to leave the building until he talked to his damn bitch. This time, the wrestler helped Haroldson leave the building. Obviously, he got the hint because he never came back. He sent several voicemails to Charlotte's phone. In some of them, he cried and promised to change. In others, he threatened to beat her half to death. The garden intrusion alarm went off at around 8 p.m., and seconds later, a stone was thrown through one of the living room windows, breaking the external self-cleaning triple-glazed glass. The stone thrower ignored warning signs about the presence of an alarm. It was stupid of him because now we had his security camera image. Charlotte recognized him as one of Kent's friends. I waited an hour and a half before I called him on the phone. He was at home, and I gave him a simple choice: pay the bill directly to the glazier or let the police and bailiffs handle the matter for a much higher price. He confessed and agreed to pay the glazier's bill, although it would be quite expensive for him, obviously more expensive than a week's holiday with airfare and all-inclusive in a good hotel on some Mediterranean island. Growing number of robbers from Eastern Europe took advantage of our almost open borders, so I installed a rather sophisticated alarm system. One reason is my expensive hunting rifles, but the main reason is that I sometimes work from home and sometimes store confidential company information there. When I had to replace the old windows, the new ones were triple glazed, with exterior self-cleaning glass, laminated safety glass in the middle, and indoor-facing energy-efficient glass. The rain kept them clean on the outside, and thanks to the energy savings, I got some of the cost reimbursed by the government in the form of a tax deduction. Although much of the cost was still on me, the cheerful guy who installed them consoled me by saying that the energy saved would pay for it in 100 years or something like that. I bought him a beer, which he appreciated, and consoled me by saying that if those who predicted a sharp rise in oil prices were right, the savings would pay for the new windows in just 25 years. The next day, while doing some personal business at the bank, I was threatened by a tall, thin man whom I had never seen before. He shouted a lot of threats and accused me of being a damn homosexual who seduced the wife of a decent man. How could this even happen? Although my company was probably the most important client of this bank, no one on staff tried to stop him. Instead, I noticed that several of the employees behind the counter were chuckling. One young man in particular, about 25, seemed to take great pleasure in it. I took several photos of him and the bully on my cell phone. When I finished my business at the counter, I handed my business card to the female teller and told her that if this bank expected to continue doing business with my company, I expected to see the bank manager in my office within half an hour. She turned pale, realizing the situation, and began to apologize. Taking a local sports star's beautiful wife did not increase my popularity in this city, but I would never agree to be a laughing stock for that reason. The bank manager arrived after 25 minutes, but I made him wait another 10 minutes while Matilda prepared a four-color printout of the laughing young man behind the bank counter. Then I called in the shaking bank manager, told him he ran a damn place, and asked how badly they treated regular customers when they treated one of their most important customers like crap. Of course, he tried to apologize in every possible way, but I handed him the photo and said, "If that laughing freak who seems to be having a good time while your customers are being bullied is still working at your bank an hour after you leave this office, you can be sure that this company will no longer be your client." I knew the manager would have a big and probably costly problem with this young man's union, but apparently he considered the loss of my business to be a bigger problem. 40 minutes after he left my office, he called me and told me that the young man had been fired. However, this skinny guy has not forgotten me. When Charlotte and I walked out into the company parking lot, he was there and rushed at us, along with a slightly beefier-built accomplice who immediately attacked me, while the skinny one attacked Charlotte, shouting, "Cheating bitch, you'll learn a lesson." Although my anger gave me extra strength, it took me at least 15 seconds to knock my attacker to the ground and help Charlotte. Much to my disappointment, I saw that not one of the 10-15 of our male colleagues who witnessed the attack lifted a finger to help Charlotte. Only one young girl immediately came to her aid, and together they tried to hold the thin man's hands. I hurried towards them, covering a few meters, and managed to punch the attacker in the nose with such force that his knees buckled, and he slowly fell to the ground. The large accomplice rose to his feet and ran away as quickly as he could. I shouted to the skinny guy to get out of here quickly if he valued his life. He obeyed. Now, even some of those cowards who witnessed the attack on their colleague came closer and asked if there was anything they could do to help us. I told them that the only thing such damn cowards could do for me was to disappear from my sight. Then I got busy with the young girl and Charlotte. Before we parted, I asked her to come to my office the next day. When we got home, Charlotte told me that a young girl immediately came to her aid when she screamed. We agreed on how we will proceed in this situation. Nothing much happened over the next few days, except that one evening Charlotte and I had our first fight. It only lasted a few seconds and ended with a lot of laughter on both sides. Later in the evening, we had great sex, after which I suggested that we fight a lot more often. Apparently, she didn't agree because she started hitting me hard with a pillow. This also ended with a good laugh and another great sex session. While relaxing after that great sex, she asked me, "Are you going to ask me to do something I hate, now that you've caught me on your web?" I was surprised and asked, "Do you think I'm an evil spider?" "I love you." Then she gave me pleasure. Afterwards, she hugged me tightly and said, "I felt tempted to do this out of love when I had no obligation to do it, and I must admit that love makes me feel differently. Doing it out of love for you was nice, while doing it at his request was disgusting." Linda kept her promise, and she and Aguilo gave us an unforgettable dinner, refusing to ask about payment. We had the opportunity to thank them on one of the other Saturday nights when they were invited to the wedding. Charlotte and I agreed that we would run the crowded tavern, and we dealt with a few problems with good help from Linda's parents, who did the cooking. Charlotte and I immediately immersed ourselves in an active social life in our village, participating in numerous parties with my old friends and neighbors, but attending very few events in her hometown, although I was an important person there. Of course, I received many invitations to dinners and parties, but I said no thank you to everyone who invited me as a single person, even though the whole town knew that I lived with Charlotte. Apparently, most people who didn't know Charlotte well thought she was a bitch for leaving her athletic husband for her boss, and therefore avoided including her in invitations. It's hard to understand the strange morality of some small towns. I was attacked again. This time Marietta, Emil, and Charlotte and I went to a theater in the city, and after the performance 2 men attacked me shouting that it was time for payback. Emil immediately took control of one of them, but I had a slightly stronger attacker who managed to land several strong blows to my face before I was able to grab his right arm and knock him to the ground with the cue button I had on a bunch of keys. 2 off-duty police officers who were also at the performance witnessed the entire situation and detained the 2 assailants until a police car arrived. Since then, I have not heard anything from the police regarding this case, and it is likely that the attackers escaped any consequences. Unlike most companies, the company where I was managing director did not have a Christmas party. Instead, we celebrated the birthday of the man who founded the company with a big party every year, always on the first Saturday after November 12th, his birthday. The main advantage was that organizing the holiday and getting everything we needed was much easier when we planned it before the main holiday season. Few people noticed that it was a little earlier than the start of the holiday season. This year, we rented a gym and were even able to invite one of the best dance groups in the country. Local television and newspapers were also invited for a special reason. When dinner was almost over, I walked on stage and told the guests that I had important news. The first item was to present gold watches and flowers to 3 people who had worked for the company for 25 years. The next event involved one of the Marietta employees who came up on stage with a large crystal vase of red roses to say a few words to his new boss. I took the microphone and said, "Mariette Hallerston, please come up on stage." She was truly beautiful that evening. Elegant, she looked much younger than her age. Her colleague took the microphone and began his short speech with the phrase, "Dear Mother," which caused thunderous applause. He was a very good speaker, and in his short speech, he wished her luck in her new job. She had tears in her eyes as she thanked him and everyone else at the company for working with her in her new position. In my mind, I thanked God that I had resisted all the temptations to try to seduce her during our first business trip. Because I set aside these foolish intentions, I was able to do my job for the good of the company, provide good conditions for Marietta and her family, and even make dear friends for Charlotte and me. When Marietta left the stage with her flowers, I invited Olivia Lind, the same young girl who helped Charlotte, to the stage. She came up and, dressed in a very short evening dress, looked like a beautiful and very young teenager. I addressed the guests. "It is my great honor to introduce you to Miss Olivia Lind, one of the bravest people I have ever met." One day after work, when Charlotte Haroldson and I walked out of the office into the parking lot, we were attacked by two men. I was able to deal with my attacker, but Charlotte ran into problems when she was attacked by a possibly mentally unwell 46-year-old former footballer. Although no less than 15 of our male colleagues were present, none of these pathetic cowards dared to help the poor woman. How many photographs of Olivia were taken, and I continued. I am proud to say that this young lady, Miss Olivia Lind, was braver than all those 15 cowardly men put together, and immediately rushed to the aid of the victim. Although they received several blows, the two women managed to hold off the attacker until I knocked my opponent down and tackled the one who attacked our colleague. Some guests began to shout, "Name the names of the panties." Of course, I didn't name names, but I think the cowards felt quite humiliated. I continued, "Because lack of civic courage is a growing problem in our society, our company has created a fund to reward those who are brave enough to come to the aid of another person in danger. The fund is named the Olivia Fund, and the awards are called the Olivia Awards." I heard loud applause and said, "As you might have guessed, the first Olivia Award goes to Olivia Lind herself." When I asked her if she wanted something special, she told me, "My boyfriend did so much extra work when we were rebuilding our apartment and moving in together, so I'd like to send him somewhere for our national hockey team to play." Some of the guests shouted, "Give her 2 tickets." But I said, "Olivia, could you ask your boyfriend to join us on stage?" When he joined us, I handed Olivia a large envelope and said, "Sorry, Olivia, but we couldn't get tickets to the national hockey team for your boyfriend." The guy immediately replied, "I don't need anything. Living with her is the best reward I could ever receive in my life." I continued, "As I said, there are no tickets for the national team, but I did not say there is no hockey. Dear Olivia, on behalf of the Olivia Foundation, it is my great pleasure to present you with this envelope containing 2 air tickets to Toronto, Canada, a hotel stay there, a tour of the Air Canada Centre, and tickets to an NHL game featuring the Toronto Maple Leafs. Afterwards, you'll spend a few days at a romantic hotel in Niagara Falls and go on a tour of the falls." I think Olivia jumped 2 feet in the air when she heard what I said. Then she hugged and kissed her boyfriend, and even hugged me and kissed me on the cheek. No doubt she was very happy. When the band started playing, I hardly saw Charlotte after our first dance, because she was very busy when many of the male staff wanted to dance with the leading lady, as they called her, and did not accept her objections that the real leading lady was the elderly wife of the chairman of the board of directors. Even Marietta had a line of her boys waiting to dance with their beautiful boss. I only got a few chances to relax at the bar, and it sparked merriment when the band started playing upbeat rock and roll, and young Olivia pulled me onto the dance floor. She was an excellent dancer, and other guests gave us space on the dance floor, and some of them even shouted, "Keep dancing, Olivia." However, after the dance, we received loud applause. When we got home after the last dance at the party, Charlotte told me that she had had a wonderful evening and that she had fallen even more in love with me and had a surprise for me. She took my hand and led me into our bedroom, where she undressed both herself and me. Charlotte and I attended 4 weddings in the year between the first and second office party we attended as a couple. The most memorable one for us was our own, which we arranged 2 weeks after her divorce was finalized. The second wedding was for my secretary, Matilda. She danced all evening at a corporate party with a recently hired young engineer. They fell in love, and she left her boyfriend 2 weeks later. The third wedding was to Olivia Lind, whose boyfriend felt the romance of one evening at Niagara Falls as they strolled admiring the illuminated falls. He couldn't resist the temptation to propose, and Olivia immediately replied, "Yes, I want to." Today, 11 months after the office party, Charlotte and I are the proud parents of a 1-month-old boy. We had already discussed the possibility of having another child in the near future, but decided to wait a couple of months before starting to actively try. Charlotte will be staying at home for a while, but she's already signed up for evening courses at university, so she'll be very busy. Agilo found us a wonderful girl from Greece to act as a nanny, which helps Charlotte a lot. Oh yeah, fourth wedding. There was a couple in our village who had been living in a civil marriage for many years, and he promised to give her a big wedding if he won the races. He won, and they had a grand wedding. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.